I'd say talk amongst yourselves, but I'd probably never get you back.
You know us.
1961. 3 years before the Beatles stormed America. 4 years before the Ford Mustang hit its high watermark. And 10 years before I was born. It was a wow moment for me. In 1961, the Unitarians and the Universalists eyed each other up, liked what they saw, and got hitched. Or something like that. And the merger got a lot of things right. For instance, check out our principles and sources. They came about in preparation for the merger, and you can see them up here behind me. And they're also in your hymnal. And in fact, I'd like you right now just to open to that page. It's right at the beginning after the copyright stuff. Just have a look. I don't even think it has a page number, but they're there, and I think that they're pretty amazing. Not everyone agrees, of course. I've heard them referred to as the 7 banalities. But I think that's a little too dismissive. In fact, I think that dismissiveness is an attitude under which our principles are constantly suffering. On the contrary, if we were so brave as to take our principles to heart, to investigate them and invest them with our intellect and our actions, we may find our lives taking on a new depth. Call me naive, but I truly believe that. Go ahead. Behave with the profound knowledge that every person is born into dignity. Act within the understanding of the deep ecology of an interconnected web of existence. If you live that, it's mind-blowing. And to think that these principles and sources came out of committee work. They did. And then they were voted on by the gathered separately, by the gathered Unitarians and the gathered Universalists. This is actually happening the year before the merger. They had to create these before they could agree. This is like their vows in a way, right? But it was voted on, and you look at these things and how profound they can be, and this came about through democracy. It's quite a testament. Of course, we're Unitarians and Universalists, so at the last minute, the principles and sources almost did not come off. There was a hitch. Over literally a few words. But words are important. And that hitch over a few words nearly sunk the principles and sources, which in turn threatened to sink the entire merger. We were a problematic pronoun away from never happening. The resolution came about at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I tell you that for a number of reasons. I want to direct your attention to our principles and encourage you to dig into them. Make of them a study and a wrestling partner. Also, I want to celebrate them and their creation story and acknowledge how they are the product of our tradition's trajectory and marvel at their insight. And I want to do all of that because of what I'm going to say next. They blew it. And we are living with their omission to this day. In fact, their oversight may be why many of us were initially attracted to Unitarian Universalism. But over the long term, we are a faith and a people diminished by a critical absence in the principles. So what is this lapse? It is this. In championing our dignity, the crafters of the principles left out our frailty. In celebrating human being, they left out our humanity. They paint this beautiful picture of possibility, but they leave out the pain. They leave out the muck and mess of life. And in setting up a guidepost in this manner, they create the orientation for more pain, more muck, and more mess. As a result, our tradition is gutted of spiritual depth. Of course, the principles and sources are only the most recent and formal oversight on this issue. The drafters of them then get somewhat of a pass. They were merely surfing the wave of our tradition's trajectory. For instance, the universalist message that we are all saved eventually evolves into an argument against the prevalent, if misguided, concept of original sin, a doctrine that itself evolved away from the wisdom of its own generating myth, which is Adam's fall from grace and eviction from Eden. So, a little wordplay before we move on. Original sin is, of course, a Christian doctrine, and the Christian scriptures were written in Greek about, and in some cases by, Jews. And the Greek word for sin is hamartia, and it literally means missing the mark. It means not perfect. So sin is more accurately construed as a mistake or a defect than evil. So keep that in mind. So meanwhile, the Unitarian traditional emphasis on the individual, thank you, Emerson, and faith in the abilities of humanity and our theme of moral development gave less and less and then no quarter to the notion that mankind is inherently flawed. Indeed, that the arc of the universe, with us riding its chronological crest, is dependent on flaws. And if sin is missing the mark, a defect, then evolution, creation, and the wheel of time itself is spun by sin, spun by imperfection. So that's admittedly rather extravagant and perhaps too baroque for us at this hour. So let's get back to the principles and what they left out and what that does to us. So open your hymnals again and check out that first principle. Inherent dignity. It's challenging. It's awesome. awesome, but. Inherent dignity, yes, but where there is our inherent vulnerability? The truth is there is a pretty good reason why our spiritual ancestors dispensed with bringing up our vulnerability. This was a reaction in many ways to the Calvinist, which is to say broadly Protestant, infatuation with what the Protestants call inherent depravity or depravity. But just as depravity overshoots, not to mention judges our incompleteness, we perhaps overshot in our rejection of any inherent mar on our character. And in rejecting inherent damnation, we damned ourselves. To hell? Okay, first of all, no, not to hell. Come on. We are not damned to hell. Second of all, yes, to hell. A kind of hell, anyway. The rejection of our original sin creates a blind spot. It creates unreasonable expectations of others and unhealthy evaluations of ourselves. Unreasonable expectations of others and unhealthy evaluations of ourselves yield poor relationships, schizophrenia, depression, and a culture wherein forgiveness asked and given is based more on my need to maintain constancy rather than on an understanding of the spiritually transformative and freedom-creating practice of mercy. That was a very long sentence. I will say it again. Rejecting the wisdom behind original sin invites unreasonable expectations of others and unhealthy evaluations of ourselves, which yield poor relationships, schizophrenia, and depression, and a culture wherein forgiveness asked and given, even to oneself, is based more on my need to maintain constancy rather than on the understanding of the spiritually transformative and freedom-creating practice of mercy. And that is a kind of hell. We expect each other to be perfect. We expect our board president to be perfect. We expect our administrator to be perfect. We expect our musicians, our fellow members, our politics, our politicians, our family, our children, our friends, our lives to be perfect. We don't even do this on purpose. I mean, it is ridiculous if somebody asked you whether or not that was a accurate play. No, you would say. And yet we go about doing it all the time. It is part of our culture and subconscious. And look, I'm not here to justify incompetence and negligence. But our unconscious assumption of perfection is an impossible ideal. We do not emphasize that. We all too often expect perfection, even in spite of ourselves. We've been taught to expect it. And we've aligned ourselves with a religious tradition, Unitarian Universalism, which expects it implicitly and perhaps even reinforces it. And this is not the way to encourage one another. It is a way, in fact, to hurt each other's feelings. To have your own feelings hurt. and your own self-esteem attacked, and to invite a steady companion of disappointment. The expectation of perfection as a constant level of operation creates conditions for failure. We're not trying to go to the moon, right? They needed perfection, and you could get it for that little bit of time, focused time. But on a day-to-day level, we're not going to the moon. And this is all the worse when those same expectations of perfection are turned on ourselves, as they almost always are. And I don't care if you are king of the castle or the God King of all couch potatoes and proud of it. It's a safe bet that if you're a Unitarian Universalist, you have an estimation of yourself that is out of sorts with your reality. Of course, this is not just a Unitarian Universalist problem. It's just that we, in particular, have particularly omitted any acknowledgement that our self-conception, our self supposed to be, is shattered by any mirror, be that an actual or metaphorical mirror. We are too fat, too poor, too weak, too easily influenced, too inattentive, too impatient, too demanding, too lazy, no matter how fit, rich, principled, attentive, patient, or hardworking we may or may not be. Our self-conception is a misconception. Our reflection, incidentally, is also quite likely a misconception. And these two poisonous fictions are produced by our dereliction with regards to our assumptions about our nature, and then the subsequent lack of mercy with which we treat ourselves. And it's a tricky topic to tackle because there is an inherent tension here, and tension is wily, but I think anymore that tension is also evidence of truth. And the truth here, as far as I can wrestle it out, is that we are amazing, miraculous articulations of light whose ancestors are nothing less than the stars. And we are frightened, foolish, germy dirt clods. We are born with dignity, which is hysterical if you ever have seen a little baby right off the bat. It's not exactly dignified. It's not the word that comes to mind. It's freaking me out is what the word that comes to mind was. Beautiful. But yes, we are born with dignity. But part of that dignity comes from the guarantee that we have, do, and shall confront tragedy and self-betrayal. We are imperfect. I know that's not such a revelation, but I don't think we understand it very well nonetheless. I don't think we practice it with each other very well, and most importantly, I don't think we practice it with ourselves very well. And this leads to that nasty litany of behavior and unhealthy habits I referred to earlier. Addictions, over or under or inappropriate actions and reactions, and just in general, a lack of authenticity. So allow me to prescribe a practice to you. And those of you who were here for it may remember, I think it may have been my first sermon here, I suggested that you adopt the practice of looking into the eyes of the people you encounter all over the place, in the grocery aisle, while you're, maybe not while you're driving, but people that you encounter as you move through your day, people whose eyes you can see. You look into their eyes and see the light there. See their highest good. I encouraged you to do this and testified that my experience was that when I did this, when I sought the light in the other's eyes, I experienced an abundance of good feeling for them and in me and about the whole scene. Now I would like to add to that practice. When you look into their eyes now, see the light, see that, but also see their pain. And you'll find that easy enough. You'll see it around their eyes, and in their face, and in their posture, and their movements. See their imperfection, not with judgment, but with mercy. See their brilliance as well as their despair. And then you will see beauty. Now, perhaps I can do this with the principles as well. And I ask you to open your hymnals once again. And find the principles and sources. Now, I was condemning the principles in particular because they did not take into account our vulnerability, our imperfection, and so therefore neglected guiding us into a merciful and beautiful encounter with each other and ourselves at the cost of our spiritual depth. But as I attend to them with a more merciful eye, I find that I am able to see more to them than I originally did. When I look at them in this way, in fact, vulnerability flows throughout the principles. If you read down through them, one cannot have compassion without acknowledging our inherently flawed existential situation. The democratic process implies that no one has all the answers. And in fact, that loss is as much a part of our walk together as victory. And then there is the interdependent web of all existence. Interconnectedness implies vulnerability. If we are interconnected, if existence is interdependent, then we are subject to constant change and influences that override our sense of self-control. We are existentially, ontologically vulnerable if we are interdependent. And there is yet an even deeper level to the principle's omission of our frailty. The very imperfection represented by the omission of imperfection should glare at you so brilliantly that you become aware of imperfection. There's an incredible, probably accidental, and therefore all the more powerful poetry here. The omission of sin is itself a sin, and therefore exemplifies itself by its absence. That is deep poetry and titillating midrash. And that it is accidental gives it the sanction of the divine. At least to me it does. And so, an investigation with mercy yields new insight and deeper appreciation, and indeed calls us rather than points us in a direction that will yield spiritual depth and beauty. We are broken, and we are beautiful. So walk in that. If you will now rise as you are willing and able, and join together in singing hymn number 101, Abide with Me. I'll extinguish the chalice if you will read along with me our mission statement, which is printed at the bottom of your order of service. This church
to celebrate the mercy, derive inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassion and support of each other in our spiritual searches.
So again, it's nothing we haven't heard before. But like all these simple lessons that we carry in our back pocket, we so seldom take them out, review them and learn from them and practice them. So I would encourage you this week to make a practice of mercy. Look into the other's eyes and see the light there and also the pain. And see what change that works in your life. Amen.